This is Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. An informal chats with top business moguls as they share their stories of failure and success in a fun and relaxed way. Get entertained, educated, and unlock the secrets to success.
Welcome to Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman. I am excited to join you again. I have a wonderful friend and guest, Monty Bennett, who's the CEO and chairman of Ashford Inc. Welcome, Monty.
Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you on the program. I've been watching your business grow for the past several years that I've been in Texas, and you have an amazing operation. Tell us about what you're doing. Tell us about your business. For all these young entrepreneurs and people that are getting started in their careers and growing businesses, you've grown a business, and it's just amazing what you've done. Sure.
Well, if you want a little history, I joined my father way back in '89 when I got out of school, and he had just gone through a rough patch, and we were in business together for a number of years. And then around 2000s, we started to do less together, and I started to move off in my own direction, and ultimately established and have three main businesses, three publicly traded until just a few days ago. One of them is now in the process of going private, so wow. Two public and one private. And it's been fun. It's a lot of ups and downs. So the hotel industry is quite the exciting one. So we've made it through and continued to do well.
Now, I can't imagine what COVID did from a hotel perspective, but we won't talk about that currently. But why the hotel industry? How did you become interested, excited about the hotel industry? I have a good friend that has mentioned to me that hotels, more than just staying in a room or having a room available, but it's really the real estate aspect. There's just so much complexity into the business. But how'd you end up in the hotel industry?
Well, the answer is not very dramatic. It's that my father was in the business before me, and I have an identical twin brother.
Oh, wow.
And we were both thinking about what do we do for college, and he said, well, why don't you go to Cornell? It's got the hotel school up there. It's supposed to be one of the better ones. And my brother and I were like, okay, sounds just as good as anything else. And so we both went to hotel undergrad.
Oh, interesting.
Stayed there at Cornell to go to grad school in business. So
both of you went to Cornell?
Both of us did.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And both of us stayed on to get our MBAs. And then he went into full-time ministry. Okay. And then I went to work with my father. But what you said is exactly right, in that it's a very interesting business, and that it has very real estate focused segments, but it's also an operating business.
Right.
And there's also construction involved, if you like that. There's technology involved, if you like that. It's a very much people business, if you like that. So there's all different kinds of aspects to it that are very interesting.
So that's fascinating. Twin brother.
I
cannot imagine what life was like growing up. I've always wondered.
He's, as I say, he's my very handsome identical twin brother. So
very impressive. I had a chance to visit Conrad Hilton's first hotel out in Cisco, Texas a few weeks ago. And
sure.
It was fascinating. And I read a little about the history and his progression. And they had a bit of a downturn early in their days. And I think he sold his hotels and then moved to California and rebuilt the business. And just an amazing operator.
He is. He's a legend.
Yes. So you've had the business. How did you get started? Like you mentioned that you started with your father and then you moved on to create your own business. But what inspired you to create your own business? A lot of people, they have great ideas on starting a business, but they find it hard. They don't know where to start, how to get the funding, what exactly to do next. But you were able to manage that. Well,
I was very fortunate in that I was working with my father, and my father's great, and he's brilliant. But we were just rubbing on each other.
Right.
And so one day I told my father, look, I just want to go, off on my own and do my own thing. And he says, Monty, let me just retire.
Oh, wow.
And you just kind of, do this. And I said, okay, well, it's kind of the same. And so our business was small then, but had grown a good bit. Okay. And then so I took it from then, and my father continued to serve in some roles on the board and here and there, and still an investor in one of the platforms.
So
I had it easier than most. I was very fortunate in that regard.
Sure. I had a great conversation with another entrepreneur, and he mentioned those early days, getting the property he needed to start his business was just hard. He couldn't get the funding for it, and then he found a good friend. So it's amazing what work is required to build a business, even if you have a slight start, like it sounds like you mentioned, there's still a lot of work to it. It's in some cases 24 hours in those early days just growing it.
It's a lot of work, and one of the branch offs that I did early on was to take one of the platforms public in 2003. Wow. And that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of time, right. And on the road and flying around. And I don't fly commercial very often,
right.
And I'm sorry, I don't fly private very often. And but when you do a road show to go public, it's necessary. And
right.
so we were flying around the country and making a pitch and getting on a plane and flying someplace else. Anyway, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of risk because
right.
you never know if it's going to get off the ground or not. So yeah, it's a lot of work. And then with a lot of the things that have happened in our economy, it's been a lot of work trying to survive those as well. Having planes fly into buildings and these things right. make it tough.
Well, and you mentioned 2003, so that was a weird time coming right out of 9/11. Just things were changing. I was in the home building industry at that period of time, and so we had the big tech burst around 2000, and then the 9/11 event, and then by 2006, the home building market was starting to soften. So I can imagine that being a tricky time to convince people to invest in the industry.
It was. But you just keep pushing through it.
Right.
And, someone was talking to me or asking me one day about kind of success and on and on. And I heard someone say something that I thought was very interesting. And that was, well, it's much easier to be successful if you just never quit.
Right.
And just keep at something and keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. And eventually you'll achieve some version of
right.
what you're trying to do.
Right.
It's just staying at it no matter what.
And that's an interesting point. If you don't mind me asking an additional set of questions around it. I was with Steve Case. I don't know if you're familiar with Steve Case,
sure.
founder of AOL. And he brought up the same kind of notion that people thought that when AOL became big, that it had always been big. He said, no, it took us 10 years to reach that point. And I think your point is absolutely right. You have to decide, do you stay with it or not? The other person that I mentioned to you earlier who had a tough time finding that real estate property, he said that he went to his wife at a certain point and said, should we stay with this? And she said, this is your dream. You're good at it. Stick with it. You'll be fine.
Good for her.
So what was your impetus behind just staying with it in those early days, just knowing that it was the right place to be? Was there either a person, your dad, or someone else that said, look, Monty, this is where you need to be?
I think it was as much of anything just a really strong desire not to fail
right.
and to be successful, right?
Right.
And I wanted to be successful, and I wanted to work hard and be successful. I knew it would take hard work, and so it's just staying at it. And
right.
and you've got to do something, right? And so why not keep at what you're doing? Because no matter what you do, what you face, there's going to be challenges. Right. And there's no guarantee that if you switch gears, whatever you move towards is going to be any easier.
That's true.
So you might as well just keep plugging away.
Yeah, you're right. And some people do think that the grass is green on the other side. So if they make a switch, then maybe it'll be a little easier. But no matter what you do, it's going to be hard, whether you're just working for someone else your entire career.
That's right.
Yeah, quite interesting. So what's next then in the business? Can you tell us a little bit more about the business, what you do, like what space you occupy in the hotel industry?
Sure. A number of years ago, we started this public platform, and it's a hotel REITs, which essentially just owns hotel real estate, then right. investors invest in it. And after, I think it was after the great financial crisis, when I'm at a presentation, and some other of my REIT peer CEOs were up talking, and they said, look at our stock price. We went from this price to this price right. since the bottom, and our stock price is up 400%. Isn't that great? And that is good, although they were right. down huge. We were all down sure. huge, and they all came rolling back, and that's good.
Right.
And then the guy from Priceline walked up, and he gave a presentation, and he said, since the bottom of the great financial crisis, we're up 5,000%.
Oh, wow.
And that's what I said to myself. I was like, whoa. And as I sit there and I thought about that, I realized that the hotel industry did just fine without Priceline or Booking.com for 5,000 years. We don't need them.
Right.
But they can't exist without an airline industry and a hotel industry. Right. Yet they have enormous returns on capital.
Interesting.
While our business had much, much more modest returns on capital. Their business is scalable.
Right.
Ours is very difficult to scale. Theirs is capital light. Ours capital heavy. There's people light. Ours people heavy. And so I scratched my head, and there's an expression: if you sit on the table and you don't know who the schmuck is, it's you. And so I thought, well, aren't I the schmuck? I'm the one putting up all the capital, or raising the capital. I'm the one, managing these vast legions of people to get respectable returns, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15% returns.
Right.
But meanwhile, the interloper comes into the industry with a better idea, a better mousetrap,
That's right.
and makes just enormous returns on capital.
Right.
And I said, I got to do things different. I got to be smarter here. So through a series of events, what I did is I spun out kind of an operating company. And with the 3 companies we have now, essentially one is a hotel REIT, but all it does is own hotels. A second is another hotel REIT, and all it does is own really high-end hotels.
Okay, makes sense.
And then the third is an operating company. And what it does is it provides advisory services to those platforms. It provides property management to them. It provides audio-visual services to hotels. It provides water sports to resort hotels. So it provides all kinds of services to hotels.
Right.
So it provides services to those REITs and those hotels, but it also provides services to all other hotels in the country. And we're starting to expand. And so these operating businesses, while still somewhat people intensive, were a lot less capital intensive.
Right.
And I could grow with my retained earnings. While if you're growing a hotel REIT, the only way you can grow is by going to the public markets and raise money.
Right.
And that's difficult to do. The hotel REIT industry in the public markets, for the past maybe 5-10 years, they're just not open to accepting capital. The investors are not interested. And so all my hotel REITs peers have not grown at all over the past 5-10 years. But we've been able to grow because we transformed ourselves and have operating businesses as well. Yeah. So it's been a way to get much higher returns on capital and to be able to grow much easier.
So that's fascinating. And I won't go into a lot of detail in those businesses because I know that's kind of your secret sauce. But I did notice that you were pretty well vertically integrated. And even when you look at, there was one company I was looking at of yours, the Inspire Group. And they grew year over year, if I remember correctly, from 44 million in revenue to like 120, which is just incredible growth. So you're right. You've done something different at working with those auxiliary services. I think you manage the technology for your key entry on your hotels. Really impressive.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's trying to go into these ancillary businesses where we can kind of jumpstart them by having the hotels that we control to give them business and then to grow from there. And Inspire was a great mom and pop business here in town called GSAV, run by the Jose family, great people.
Wow.
And they had an EBITDA of around, I think, $4 million. And we bought it and brought in professional management and added our hotels to it and then started growing. And we'll do maybe 20-25 million of EBITDA this year. And that's even through COVID and all of that, which has been a difficult thing to do.
It is.
And it's got a great growth trajectory. It's got its best times ahead of it.
Yeah, a lot of opportunities in that space. Well, and you mentioned something that I find absolutely amazing, that you purchased the company and been brought in professional management. I've worked with a number of private equity companies, and their model is the same. They take these companies that are great ideas, that are founder-led, but the founders oftentimes just don't have that professional expertise, so they come in and bring that mentorship and leadership. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, Paul Hirschbill, some years ago. I brought him in, he spoke to my executive team, and he said that one of the investments he had early on, that founder really understood that concept, and that founder was one of few that stayed with the company throughout the duration of the company. And so I tell you a quick story on him, but we've done that in private equity. And you're right, you bring on a good team, solid team, and what you can do with a great idea is just incredible. But quick story, Monty, I don't know if you've heard this beforehand. I don't think I've said it yet in one of our programs, but this friend of mine said that he was introduced to this young person who was working out of his mom's garage way back in the 80s, and he was encouraged to invest. And he said, I don't have an interest. That's not my kind of company. And then he saw another friend maybe some months later on another trip that said the same thing. You should check out this company, this guy building this product in his mom's garage. And he said, absolutely not. And so after a few times that people encouraged him to go visit with this kid, he did. And he invested in that company. And then he served on their board for 18 years. That kid was Michael Dell.
There you go.
And but he said Michael Dell was absolutely brilliant at understanding the idea of bringing on the right people on his team, learning from them, and then growing the business. And so it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I commend you for recognizing how to do it, because I don't think a lot of people know how to do it well. But it sounds like you've done it. You know,
I went to high school with Michael Dell.
Did you?
He was a year ahead of me. And I didn't know him well at all. Very bright guy. Right. You know, kind of kept to himself, a little nerdy. Right. Very bright. And don't get me wrong, I was even more nerdy. And then, years later, I saw his tremendous success. So good for him. That's great. I didn't realize, until later how entrepreneurially driven he was and the like. But the guy just hit it and wouldn't stop, right? And work hard and just not stop. And that's what you have to do.
But, I know someone else who's done something similar. That's you. So you're in many ways you're a living legend in what you've been able to do, particularly in this industry. When you talk about vertical integration in a market that's hard to scale, as you mentioned. And so what you've done has just been absolutely brilliant. If you had to coach someone on why and how to take a company public, what would you tell them? You went public fairly quick, it sounds like.
Well, we did. And it's kind of the market has changed. Being public back then, when we started, was easier now. Every few years when there's some type of financial crisis or scandal, ever more regulations get thrown on top of public companies. Right. And the cost of compliance is in the millions of dollars. Enormous. And then there's other dynamics where if your market cap isn't in the several $billion equity market, floating market cap, well, you just get no interest from investors. And it's very difficult to get traction. So there's some boxes you really need to check to be public, to make sure you're willing to put up with the grief. I think that we've fended off over the years maybe 6 activists that have tried to attack the company and try to take it over or do something. And I need to look it up, but I don't think anybody has got a 6-0 record like we've got.
Impressive.
Usually they get taken over, but take a deep breath before you do it, because it's and make sure you check all the right boxes, because it's not a panacea, and it has advantages and disadvantages as to why we're taking one of the platforms private. Because it's more advantageous for that platform to be private, I believe, and it's going to do a lot better private now. I know that was
a big set of events surrounding Carl Icahn as well. That was his style of trying to, in some cases, having hostile takeovers. And I just remember the early days he took over an airline industry or an airline company at one point. But you're right, I guess, on the other side. So from someone looking at this, public versus private, what would be the advantage then of staying private? Like how can they raise capital? What advice would you give them on raising capital and staying private versus going public? There's so much not stigma per se, but a lot of people think by going public they've then made it, right? But it sounds like,
in a way you have, in a way you've certainly crossed the threshold, right? But I'll give you one example is that this platform, Ashford Inc., the operating company, a core platform. Was very thinly traded, and because of that, if you've got a stock that's thinly traded, then you really limit the investors that are interested, because most investors have a rule, something like that. They're not going to invest any more money than they can say trade out of that position, say in 5 days average trading volume, something like that. Okay, well, if you've got a small market cap, well, that's a small amount of money that someone will invest with you. And most funds aren't going to bother with investing a very small amount of money with you. So you limit your universe of who's going to invest. And then you're not going to get coverage from analysts out there unless you can do things that generate them a lot of fees. Well, if you're small, you don't generate them lots of fees, so they don't cover you. So you don't get analyst coverage. So you have this whole cycle that makes it difficult to break out. Well, then what happens then is your stock price doesn't perform very well. And it doesn't reflect very well what's going on with the company and its potential.
Right.
And so then if you do want to raise capital, or even if you just want to incentivize your employees, no one likes to look at the stock price when one day it's 50 and the next day it's 45 and the next day it's 40, because these dynamics, it gets everyone reeled down, and you tell people, look, that's just the public market value. But if we went out and sold it, it'd be 70.
Right.
Well, that's nice, but those are just words. Meanwhile, they open up the paper, they pull up their phone, and it's 40 when it was 50, a week ago.
Right.
And so from a motivational perspective and keeping people motivated, you don't want that dynamic.
Right.
Where if you're private, well, then you can go through a methodology of setting your internal value for purposes of compensating people in the fashion that you see fit.
Right.
And then if you do want to raise capital, it doesn't matter what you say or what the company is worth. If your stock is trading at $50, capital's not going to come in at a price more than $50.
Right.
They're just not. Now, if you sold the whole company maybe and went private, but if you want an investor to come in, they're not going to come in higher than 50. They're going to come in something less than 50. It's just how it's done. And if your stock's not trading well, that can be a very dilutive transaction because you're worth a lot more. And if you take capital in that cheap, then you can't make money on it. So while many times the purpose of going public is to be able to raise capital and to grow, you can't. And you're in a box. And you never get out. So another advantage of us being private is that if we do want to take in capital, now I can sit down and negotiate that with an investor based upon the prospects of the company and not based on some number that's printed somewhere.
That's fascinating. Now, having gone through so many of these evolutions through the years as you've grown the company, if you had to look back at the early you, coming out and first working for your father, just getting in the hotel industry, what would you say to the younger Monty now with the experience that you have? What lessons do you take away from those years and that might be worth sharing with someone else on what you would say to the younger Monty?
I'd say be strategic, sit and think. Don't be afraid. Everything's going to be fine. No one's going to die. Think about the best entry, the industry for what you want to accomplish. For example, the hotel industry grows at 2% a year and has since the beginning of time. Well, in a 2% growth industry, you're only going to do so well. But it's very interesting, has lots of people, and it's fun, and it's fantastic. So if that works for you, great. But if you're more interested in something more technical, or if you're interested in more financially, well, go find an industry that grows at 30, 40% a year. And as my father used to say, throw yourself in the path of success and go jump in that. And you don't have the advantages that I see in the hotel business of being very interesting and people-oriented, but that may be more what you're interested in. So do some examination of what you want to do and why, and then pick the right industry and the right people to do it with.
Now, you have locations throughout the country. How broad are you here in the U.S.?
Across the country and a few in the Caribbean and Latin America.
Fantastic. You looking at more international expansion as you grow? Sure,
but not necessarily where the opportunities are. And you want to do it strategically. On the hotel side of buying hotels, not buying internationally very much, but as far as expanding our operating business, for example, if we're going to expand into Mexico, you kind of want to expand into Mexico, not just do one site and that be it for the next 10 years, right? You want to make a push into Mexico or to another country. And so you want to be kind of strategic. Or if one of our businesses is in the Dominican Republic, say, for example, it's easier for another one of our businesses to expand into the Dominican Republic.
That's amazing.
You just think about it that way.
So I had a chance to meet another person in your industry space issue. I don't know if you grew up with him. From Houston, I think you mentioned. Tillman Fertitta. Have you spent any time with him by any chance?
Sure. I know Tillman from years ago. My father knew him and I knew him, although I haven't kept up with him.
It was interesting to see his show on television as well. And I met him a couple years ago, and a really neat guy. And what he's done has been pretty fascinating as well, from his restaurant side to his resort side of the business as well. So it's kind of cool. So what's next for you from a scaling perspective? I know you mentioned some international, some state side. Is there anything else that you can say on the horizon that might be fun and exciting? You're doing big results. You're going to get into cruises.
That's a big growth market. That's growing. That's growing. You know, we continue to grow, but frankly, a lot of my efforts have been to do more civic type things here in the past few years.
I've noticed that. Yeah.
And about 3 years ago, I became very, very convicted to really be more involved in the community. And for years, our company has done things that other company hasn't. Like we have 2 community service days where we ask our employees, and we pay for it, to go serve in the community in some way, shape, or form. A day in the spring and then a day in the fall. And we have all kinds of sponsored charities, or they can ask to do one of their own and go do that. But I really want to help make Dallas great. Dallas has a chance to be the greatest city in the United States, and therefore the greatest city in the world. Because of the dynamics that have happened with people moving out of these other cities, with them pushing business out and pursuing other objectives that then push all the business out. And Texas is growing like crazy. Dallas is more or less the business capital of Texas. As a Houstonian, that's hard for me to say, but it's true. And but we're not doing it right. And in the downtown area, which is kind of what people look to, we don't have great schools. We have a huge homelessness problem. We've got a crime problem. And it's interesting because I spoke at a function here a few months back about it, and I said what everyone knows, and that is that I want to move my business downtown, but my employees say no because businesses are moving out because of the crime and people are afraid. And boy, you would have thought that I told someone that their baby is ugly, because afterwards I stepped down and I had former mayors line up to dress me down, and how dare I say such a thing. And downtown Dallas is perfectly safe, and which of course is just totally untrue. The stats prove it, and everyone knows it's true. But I thought it's interesting is, well, no wonder things don't get better when you have city leadership lining up to say what's a complete lie, which it was. And then I thought, do these think that just by saying it, they can make it true? Some people were saying, well, we want to be pro-Dallas and don't want to discourage people from coming downtown. And my response was, you really don't think that people moving downtown aren't going to look at every single stat out there, and that you just saying it's safe is going to make them say, oh, well, they say it's safe. Forget all these stats that I see in front of me. Come on, people aren't stupid. They're going to look at all that. But no wonder things don't get better when they won't even admit it. And that's part of the problem. And so I've been working on helping some existing initiatives, launching new initiatives to really help education, crime, homelessness, you name it. I think you know that I've started this newspaper with my wife, the Dallas Express. She has her own podcast.
Oh, fantastic.
Which is she loves doing and has people come on and the like. And so I continue to grow my business, and I enjoy it, and that's great. But I've been blessed enough financially, and I'm not going to go hungry. And so I've turned a lot of my attention to seeing, well, what can I do about my city and my community if I can make a difference? And so that's what I've been spending a lot of my time on.
Well, that's impressive. I agree with you as well. I had a chance to reach out to the mayor's office just the other day to have them come and be a part of a discussion on business and businesses in Dallas area. And I'm hoping that we'll have that opportunity. But I agree with you. There's so much potential here. And you know this already. Texas is the 8th largest economy in the world. Huge economy. We have 55 Fortune 500 corporate headquarters here. And then a lot of businesses like yours that are just incredible. And I think we have some work to do. But what I admire is that you're willing to help, and that you're willing to be there and support the community that you've been around for, 30 years here in Dallas. And so that's commendable. I'd love to talk more about that to you in maybe our next program. We can have you back on the second show. I'd love to learn more about your community involvement. I saw that in your in your information. I love to talk more about company culture because I've moved a few corporate headquarters, and those are so tricky. You move it 15 minutes one way or 15 minutes the other way.
Yes.
You have half the employees happy, half not happy.
Yes.
And there's a huge dynamic to that process. So I'd love to do so in the next show. We're going to wrap up this show, but if you had, so Business Decoded is all about bringing insight on ideas and information that helps young leaders, old leaders that are building great operations figure out how they can continue to do something special. What last minute Business Decoded tips in this program would you give our listening audience?
I'd say I'd focus on the theme we started with, which is don't give up.
Right.
Don't give up. And I think many times, many of us, myself included, feel, well, I'm X years old. I should be here in my life. And don't worry about that. If there's something you want to do, keep at it. You're not going to go hungry in this country.
Agreed.
We've got such an incredible backdrop like that. There's so much wealth in this country that you're not going to be without a place to live. You're not going to be without a place to eat. You'll be fine. You may not be able to go to the Ritz-Carlton in Barbados or something, but keep at it, and you'll be successful at least one iteration of what you want to do. Just don't give up.
Wonderful, wonderful insight. Thank you for joining us, Monty, on Business Decoded. Your insight has been incredible. Your business is just phenomenal. And as I mentioned, I'd love to talk more about the other community culture-related items because I think a lot of companies miss the value in having a strong company culture, building a strong community. But I'd love to talk to you next time about that information and details. Appreciate you joining us.
Would love to. And what you're doing here is great. And congrats on all your success. Just a few months and you've already done so much great work. So congrats to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. Please be sure to subscribe and share and stay tuned for more incredible Business Decoded episodes.